Hey guys, it's Sam, and welcome to the first wrap-up of 2025. Started this year off with like a bunch of nonfiction, actually. Like half of what I've read thus far, it's 6 books, but half has been nonfiction, which is interesting. But let's get into all the books. First is Land of Milk and Honey by C. Pam Zhang. This is a standalone, kind of speculative, there's like a bit of sci-fi, but like not really. It's sort of post-apocalyptic literary fiction, and it follows a woman who is a chef in the future where there has been like this smog incident that has basically covered all of the country pretty much, and so it makes it so like none of the crops can grow and a bunch of the animals die and all of that. She wanted to be in here and now she wants to be out. Cats. And so mostly everyone has to eat like mung bean paste stuff and whatever, and she has been a chef, and not like the best chef, but a very ambitious chef, and gets this job offer for this like mysterious research facility that's on the top of a mountain in Italy. And they're like, we want like a French chef, and she kind of lies to get in because she's not quite a French, like classically trained chef, in order to cook. Like they have access to all this food. So it's kind of like the wealthy elite, what they would do in the case of this, and people that get pulled into that and whatever. And there's this like sapphic romance that happens also. And this was just fine. The writing is really good. Like there's all of this use of language around food and culinary experiences, and just like the way she talks about everything is very food taste based. And so the writing is very cool in that like literary way, but the actual story just felt like it's pretty slow. The characters were like fine for me. Like I wasn't like super connected to them necessarily. And I don't think that the like plot and the themes of this did anything super interesting. Like there's a little bit of this like, again, what would wealthy people do, in the way that wealthy people don't experience things like natural disasters in the same way as everybody else. And they're also being different ways to kind of like have a palate, because it's kind of talking about like the tastes and the experiences and whatever. So like that journey a little bit, but again, this wasn't anything that felt like it was saying anything new. Not that everything has to, but I know a lot of people have like talked very highly of this book, and again, the writing is very good, but it just didn't necessarily hit for me personally with what it was talking about. So like 3.5 stars, I think, for that one. Then I read Fighting for Our Friendships by Danielle Bayard Jackson. This is a woman who pops up on TikTok when I was actually on TikTok, and talks about like female friendship and the importance of female friendship and like friendship coaching, and just has done like a lot of research and things and talked to a lot of people about female friendship specifically. And I just thought it was an interesting book because there's not a lot of like books on this topic. So I wanted to try it when she came out with this book. So I read it half in physical copy, half on audio. And this was again like fine. Like if you have any kind of understanding of a lot of like social stuff, none of this was like necessarily super groundbreaking. And I do think there were some elements, like there were some things that I didn't love, and she was also like, you're not gonna love this, about saying that like, yes, women are catty. And I don't know, it just felt very like, that can happen, and that is a trope, but it's not true of everything. And it just felt like there was some nuance that was like slightly lacking. And then there was some stuff about just like communication and things that I was like, yeah, this is like kind of basic. But it does kind of go into a lot of different situations that like female friendship specifically can get into, or just like non-male friendship. And what I did find interesting was a lot of the research on like the inherent fragility of female friendship, and that a lot of women do not kind of like fight for their friendships in the same way as like men will, or just like stay in friendships. And there's some problematic elements to men just kind of like staying in friendships that no longer serve them either, or that they like aren't very compatible or whatever. But there's this like lack of like, a lot of times people, like women especially, they kind of like go over this like idea that she has of like there's these different spheres, and when these spheres start not aligning completely, people just kind of like assume the worst, and like all humans do this, will kind of assume the worst and not actually like talk about it and like see if we can work through it and whatever. And a lot of women, and I've seen this in my personal life, I've seen this in my work with clients and stuff, where they'll just be like, well, I'm just gonna be done, and I'm just not gonna have a more intimate relationship with this person, whatever. And it's just like, but we could talk about that more. So there were some elements of this that were good. There's a lot of elements of this that are basic. I don't necessarily think this is groundbreaking. I would like to read more about the specifics of female friendship, but like she even says in this book, there's not a ton of literature on this, like a lot of the nonfiction on this. So yeah, if you know of any that kind of fall in this category, let me know. But yeah, this felt very basic. But also, if you're not like literally a therapist, like working in the fields of interpersonal relationships, you might not have as much of this information. It might be better for you. So yeah, this is again like another like 3-star-ish. It was like very much fine. And had some good points that made me think, and it made me talk to some other people about them, but not like again, groundbreaking information for me or anything. And then I read A Sorceress Comes to Call by T. Kingfisher. This is a book that I've had on hold for my library forever and kept having to like delay the hold because I was reading other books that were like on my shelf before the end of the year in 2024. But I finally got to read this. It's a standalone T. Kingfisher, kind of like, there's, I mean, it's a fantasy, but it has some more like just horrific elements in the interpersonalness of it all. So it's following a like 14-year-old girl whose mother is a sorceress, but like a narcissistic abuser sorceress. Like sorceresses aren't like a very common thing, and she uses her powers definitely for evil. She uses them to manipulate. She uses them to make her daughter obedient, basically like takes her over and so she doesn't have any agency, whatever. And so it's been like abused her entire life. Something happens with the mom so that they have to run away to a different town, and the mom is trying to get this like, I think he's like a duke or something, to marry her, and so is like trying to connive him into this, but can't use magic because weddings break magic. And so she can't do that. And that duke's, I think it's a duke, lord, whatever, his older sister, so she's like, this man is in his like 50s and so is his sister or whatever. She is like this older woman who like kind of has this sense of like dread around when the mom like arrives and notices the weirdness of the situation, because they basically like move into the manor house, and then it's like, you know, the mom is trying to convince this man to marry her, and the sister is like, this feels off. And so it's sort of this like again, interpersonal thing. You're following both of those characters, the daughter and the sister, and their like friendship dynamic that forms. And so it's kind of like a cozy fantasy that has some stakes, but they're all interpersonal stakes and not like world stakes, right? And I really liked this. This had a lot of, so most of the characters are older besides our one main character who's like 14. But yeah, it's kind of exploring some of that like abuse and elements of abuse, like very heavy with the abuse themes. But also some of this like friendship stuff, like the friends that come and try to help Hester, who's the sister. And then there's like a romance element, like very background, with Hester and this man who has like been in her life for a long time and is obviously very in love with her. And it's like very sweet. And she talks about like aging and all this stuff. So again, classic T. Kingfisher, just like getting it perfect with like the different character dynamics and the different like character personalities. Like the way that T. Kingfisher adds in character quirks to make people be really fleshed out is lovely. Yeah, and I really liked this. I think I gave it like 4.5 stars. It didn't quite get to a 5 for me. There's just some things that I just was like, yeah, just didn't have the vibes of a 5 for me. Like fives are like a feeling more than they are like anything concrete. This is very close though. I do love T. Kingfisher. I'm going to read way more of her hopefully this year. So yeah. Good way to start off the year. Then I read Let This Radicalize You by Kelly Hayes and Mariami Kaba, who are two, at least when they wrote this, were like Chicago activists. And this is just a book kind of talking about activism and advocacy work and how to like not burn out in it or how to get into it. They kind of talk about this being like a book mostly written for people trying to get into the work, but also has some good stuff for people who have been in it for a while. And just basically talks about like their experience with different advocacy and activism spaces, how to take care of yourself in those spaces, how to network in those spaces, and like is pretty heavy hitting with like the, hey, you're gonna have to talk to people that you don't like. Hey, you're gonna have to talk about things that are uncomfortable. Hey, you're gonna fuck up sometimes. Hey, you're gonna have to take a break sometimes. And this was written, I think, in like post sort of 2020. Yeah, it was definitely post 2020. Like maybe like 2022, and then definitely talks about some of their activism like during the first Trump administration, and just feels very relevant right now. Like even talks about just like different organizations to be familiar with, what to do with protest kind of such scenarios, things outside of protest. Like it just feels very politically relevant for the United States at this current point. So yeah, listen to this one because this has unlimited copies at my library because they are Chicago writers. And so it talks a lot about like some of the Chicago specific stuff as well, which is cool, but it's not like just for Chicago. They just use Chicago examples because they lived in Chicago. So yeah, I really enjoyed this. It's something that I could get a physical copy of and like reference and things, because at this point my political like stance or like how I'm approaching politics is like I don't want to get burnt out in the way that I was with the first Trump administration of just like being mad every single day at everything that he does. And so it's like, hey, I want action points. Like I want things to do, and like watching what he's doing on Twitter is not going to be helpful for that, or like what ifing about what's happening is not going to be helpful for that. But like, who are the people already on the ground doing things, and how can I help? And this is like kind of about that. So yeah, I really liked this. 4 to 5 stars, I would say, like solid. I wouldn't say like, it's kind of hard because with nonfiction, sometimes I'm like, well, to make it 5 stars, like it feels like the writing needs to be like something extra, and it's like not. It's a book that's like more about information, but still like that 4 or 5 star range. Nonfiction is almost harder to like rate in the same way that I do with like the vibes of a fiction novel. So as I'm reading more nonfiction, kind of figuring out how to rate these things. But yeah, highly recommend this. Then I read Stolen Focus by Johann Hari. This is another nonfiction book. Listen to this one, and this is like this is a mixed bag. So this is kind of talking about, like, I've been doing a lot of reading up on sort of like digital minimalism, social media, the impacts this has on your brain, and it's so like very obvious how like the amount of tech that we have in our lives is bad for our brains. The amount of information we have constantly coming in from everywhere around the world is not good for our brains. There needs to be some moderation. And so he kind of talks about, mostly the first half of the book is like tech, social media, the ways in which all the tech companies know this is bad for us, but also for their bottom dollar want to keep us on their platforms, obviously. But it just gives us more information about that. Like, it talks to people who used to work in like Google ethics and how they'd say like, hey, if we implement these things, it would be better for people, but people wouldn't be on the app as much. And Google was like, no. So it's just like fucked up. So the first half talks all about that. Then he kind of goes into like, our food is bad, and like maybe unschooling and blah. And I'm like, that's a little like, I was like, my guy. Okay. So there's some things where it's like, yes, our society has set up so that our focus is bad, and ADHD and anxiety are on the rise, and like that is true, and some of that is because of the way that our society is set up and living under late stage capitalism and living under like constantly being entertained, and we don't know how to be bored anymore, and that's not good. And then he goes into some of the other stuff, which I'm like, yeah, could our food be better? Sure. Is it all that? No. And like unschooling, like there are elements of like Montessori type programs that like are good to allow kids to like, you know, pick some of the things that they're going to learn, but you can't only do that. And he doesn't super advocate for all of it. He tries to kind of do a balance, but I think the latter half of the book gets a little bit more like, not quite woo-woo, because woo-woo is more like spiritually aligned. It's just more like, I think you're taking this slightly too far. I was with you with the tech stuff, my guy, but less with you with like, everything is bad. I don't know. I think that there's like some moderation even needed in that opinion. So this was like a 3-star, but I have been really enjoying reading stuff on and like reaffirming some of what I've already thought for a while. I mean, we all kind of know those damn phones. Like, there's things about the phones and the constant information that are bad for us, and are bad for our brains, and we're not adapted to this, and whatever. So this gave some more information on that. So the first half, great. Second half, cherry pick. Finally, I read Don't Let the Forest In by C.G. Drews. This is what, like Paper and Fury or something on Instagram. This is like a pretty popular bookstagrammer who does just like gothic sentient forest vibes forever. And that's what this book is. So it's a YA horror. It's following two boys, one main character, but like it's him and this like best friend who are at this boarding school, and something very obviously happened their previous year, but like you're not quite sure what it is at the beginning. And they're very obviously in love with each other, but like they're oblivious to each other. And like one of them, the main character, writes these like kind of gothic horror stories, and the other one draws them. And then those drawings start coming to life, and like they're in the forest, and they're monsters in the forest that they have to try to like keep out of, like they know that these are happening, and like why are these things manifesting, and then the forest is like getting into them and like growing out of their bodies. And yeah, it's like it's cool body, like forest body horror stuff, which I love. I don't find this scary. This is not my kind of scary, but if you don't like body horror, you're not gonna like this. And if you find forest scary, you're not gonna like this. But I think this is horror for scaredy cats for sure, because I didn't find it that scary. And yeah, it definitely has like a lot of like, there's elements of like trauma and child abuse and like grief and eating disorders and self-harm for sure. So yeah, some very heavy things in here, and like very visceral descriptions of like anxiety and depression and stuff like that. But I really dug it. It's vibey. It's like everything is foresty. Like some people aren't gonna like this writing, and they're gonna probably feel it's a little bit overwrought because everything is about like the forest and whatever. But that's my jam, man. So I gave this like 4 out of 5 stars, I would say. Yeah, there's parts of it that were kind of slow, but overall, like I liked like the twists and things, and there's some ambiguity about the ending, which I kind of like when it comes to these like horror, creepy things. So yeah, if you like creepy forests taking over people's bodies, this is a good one. So yeah, and on that note, that's all the things I've read so far as of the filming of this video. So comment below, let me know how the beginning of your 2025 reading went. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see all of you guys soon. Bye.